certainly took my time, huh?
You mean you're 2 minutes late?
I
I
am.
guess that's out of character for you. So yeah, that that's a good thing.
It never fails. I go to pick up a microphone, and you know this, something always goes wrong. So I was ready well, at this point it's 5-6 minutes ago, and I went to pull up Adobe Audition to do the recording piece, and it had some weird error and wouldn't open it. So I had to restart my computer, and it took 3 minutes to get that done, and then a couple minutes to get everything back up and ready to go. Oh, the
Adobe.
life of podcasting. I know, Adobe, right. But frankly, paying attention to folks who at least post stuff on Twitter, I have a lot fewer problems with Adobe Audition than other people seem to have with Logic. That's just my gut feel, though. I don't have any data on that. Just
I don't
saying.
know. I use Logic and I actually really like it, but
See, there you go. You got to prove me wrong.
it's just me. Small sample size.
Sample of one. Should we jump into follow-up?
Let's do it.
So you have an end-of-day checklist on here. Tell
I
me
do.
about that.
I have a checklist that I go through at the end of my day now. And the idea here is that I do this during the buffer block. And I have to admit that this is still not something that's ingrained in me yet. So I have not fully implemented this yet. But really the takeaway from last time was that I would actually have this checklist. So I do have the checklist and I need to just get better at using it now. So I'll run through 5 items that are on my end of day checklist. So when I'm done working, I get to the buffer block. Basically, I want to ask myself these questions. Number 1, are all my emails processed? Number 2, are all my inboxes emptied? So that would include NVAlt or drafts. You'll be happy to hear.
Nice.
Number 3, are all my tasks in my task manager, which is OmniFocus. Number 4, are all my meetings on my calendar? And then number 5, are all my tabs closed? I'm kind of bad at this, where I'll just close my computer and leave. And then when I open it up again, I have a whole bunch of tabs. And I know that that's a terrible thing from a productivity perspective to leave those open loops. So I put that in the checklist as well.
I started doing that like 9 months ago with the tabs thing. That just blew my mind. I did not realize I did that until, oh gosh, I'm not going to think of who suggested this. I saw somebody on Twitter. I have no clue who. I would love to give them credit, but I can't give a name. But they suggested putting process inbox and then Safari or Chrome. And I saw that and thought, what does that mean? How on earth do you have an inbox in a web browser? And they were simply referring to the tabs and trying to clear them out so that you had a clear web browser when you came back the next time. Makes total sense to me.
I know, it makes total sense to me too. I just found myself not doing that. In fact, I went back and I realized
how it goes.
I did a webinar for Agent Efficiency a couple of years ago on like some basic productivity techniques, and that was one of the things I recommended. So I need to take my own advice.
Nice.
And the checklist, as we learned last time, is hopefully the way to do that. So
cool. No, I do it as part of my daily review. So I have this whole process of doing my inbox clearing all at once. I just do it part of that. But that's usually a first thing in the morning thing as opposed to the end of the day. But it just depends on how you want to come at it, what it is that you want to do.
Right. The other follow-up item that I had was reading StrengthsFinder with Rachel. And I have to admit that I failed on this one as well. I did. Yeah. Okay. So not trying to make an excuse here. I did finally purchase the StrengthsFinder, but every time I went to purchase it, they make it really, really hard. And that was enough friction for me to just be like, I'll do this later. So basically, if you go to the website, you cannot buy just straight out of the box an access code for the assessment. You have to buy the book, and then you enter the access code, and it walks you through creating the account.
Oh.
And then what I didn't realize until just recently was that once you have that account and you log in to view your own results, you can then from that point purchase a separate access code for somebody else.
Got it.
But it's completely unintuitive. Like, I didn't want to purchase another copy of the book In fact, I was like, I went and I looked, the Kindle versions are usually cheaper.
Right.
So I'm like, I have the book already. I don't need another version of this book. Maybe I can just get the Kindle version. It'll be included in the Kindle version, but it's a physical thing. So is it actually in the Kindle version? So I went and I looked at the Kindle version, and the Kindle version is actually $20. So it's more expensive than the print one. And I don't know. It's a stupid little thing, but it was enough for me to just keep kicking the can down the road. But I did actually figure it out now, purchased the code for Rachel, have sent it to her, and we have a week off next week over the week after Christmas. So we're going as a family. We rented a big house actually through Airbnb, kind of in the
Nice.
middle of nowhere, and then her family's gonna come stay there too. So it'll be fun, and we'll be there for a week, and we'll have some downtime. There'll be a couple days where we'll be the only ones there. So the plan is that she's gonna take it then, and then we'll talk about those results in one of our family meetings.
Fun. Sounds like you need to do some sort of a screencast on how do you get a StrengthsFinder code.
Yeah, seriously, it's completely ridiculous. I don't understand. In fact, I found the screen where you could buy just the access codes
Hmm.
without being logged in, and then it tells me you need to have like an official account before you can purchase this. And the way they phrased it made it sound like you had to have a certification from Gallup in order to buy these. Like you had to
Oh,
go
wow.
through a process and be approved, but really all you need to do is have an account already. So I saw that screen and I got freaked out. I'm like, well, there's no way I'm going to be certified. So
Right.
I guess I can't purchase this, and I kind of gave up on it for a while. And then when you put it back on the on the follow up, I'm like, I really need to figure this out. So we got it.
Well, I'm glad I could prod you a little.
Bookworm is fulfilling its purpose. It's
There you
making
go.
me follow through on stuff.
Awesome. So the two that I had, one was this continued process of writing down expectations for my projects as I take them on, and then reevaluating those whenever they close. Now, I had a couple projects, and I thought I was going to have this for this episode, so this will work out well. I had a couple of those that finally were completed the past week, and as a result of that, I realized I'm terrible at thinking how a project is going to end at the very beginning, and I've never noticed that before because I was reading what I wrote down for a couple of these projects, and then I'm looking at how it actually turned out and realizing I got nowhere close in my expectations. Like, huh, interesting. But if I had, because here's the other thing that I did, I was trying to, because it was long enough period from the time I started those projects to the time I completed them that I couldn't remember what I had wrote down for the expectations on it. So I was able to kind of, I guess what I thought I originally thought I could get done on the project or how it would turn out. And the comparison of what I thought I expected and what I actually expected was drastically different, which caught me off guard because it made me think that I had actually accomplished what I intended to accomplish. But whenever I reviewed it, I realized that it was just a lot different. I don't know how else to say it without explaining the whole project and everything, which I can't do. But seeing the difference there was something that struck me, which I think is the point of that whole process, is to help you see how we actually view these things. It was just a lot more alarming than I was expecting. So I explained that in a very vague, non-descriptive way. Sorry about that.
I
But
think we get the gist of it.
yeah, it's a good process. I want to continue doing it. I'm probably going to drop it off of our follow-up for the next one just because it has served its purpose. I'm going to continue doing it, and I have been. I've continued to write down what I thought a project would do at the beginning. So I've still been doing that. I just only have 2 of them that have actually been completed. Anyway, there you go. The other piece of follow-up that I have is avoiding my phone early in the morning. This is a complete failure for me. Like, it's just, I have this tendency to just want to know if any, like, for example, I want to know, did any of my websites break overnight? Like, most of my clients will let me know if something's busted. Well, I would like to know that because if it's broken, I typically would try to fix it first thing in the morning. when I get up, which is awesome if you're in my world because that means in most cases I can get it fixed and up and running before my client ever gets out of bed. So it's kind of this magical, like, I sent Joe a thing in the night and then it just magically works in the morning. Like, I've kind of created this little monster of mine, and I I think I need to break that cycle before I'm going to be able to break the phone in the morning thing entirely. So I'm kind of copping out on that one somewhat.
That is, avoiding your phone in the morning is way harder than it should be. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, even maybe especially from a, our perspective, because we're in the productivity space, like we understand all the rationale why you want to do that, and it's still really really hard to fight that urge.
Right, right. And you would think that if, to me, it seems like I should be able to just say, I'm not going to pick it up because I know that there's a lot of negative stuff that's on there that I don't want to start my day with. There's a lot of things that can distract me and get me off my intended path for the morning, which may be developing a new plugin of some sort or writing a website, coding of some kind, writing articles. Like, it can prevent me from doing a lot of that stuff that's vital to my business or vital to what I like to do. And you would think that if I knew that, I would be able to just avoid my phone in the morning. But it's nowhere close to that. It doesn't even come in that ballpark. It's just something that completely messes with me because I keep thinking this should be simple and should be obvious. And yet it's one of the hardest things I feel like I've done in a long time.
Right. Yeah. Which is why one of my action items was to remove email from my phone. And
Right.
I'm finding now that there are times where I feel the urge to go in and check it, but physically I'm not being able to do it is great.
Nice. Well, maybe I should start using a different alarm clock and put my phone downstairs in the morning. I don't know, but it's not working the way I'm doing it, so I need to try to figure out some other ways of coming at it or trying to break some of these current cycles or expectations that I've set. I probably need to break some of those currently before I'm going to get anywhere with that one. Just the way it goes. Which may lead me into our book for today, simply because it's going to make me ask questions and why in a lot of cases. So the book that we have read for our conversation today is QBQ, The Question Behind the Question, which is by John G. Miller. And I think I called this out in the last couple episodes, but this is a book that's on a list of books put together by Dave Ramsey, if you're familiar with him. And this is one of the books that at least he used to require his new hires to read before they started. I don't know if he still does that or not, but it was on a list at one point that he would ask people to read before they started working for him. And having read it, I can understand why. There are a few other books that are on that list that I have planned to make you read with me, Mike. And listeners, I'm going to, prod us a little bit because I just think it'd be fun to go through all of those books that he has recommended for his employees. And that is the entirety of why I picked this book, Mike. No philosophical, no deep underlying need on this one. There you go.
I'm glad you picked this one, and I can totally see why Dave Ramsey or really anybody would require their employees to read this. There's a lot of workplace examples in here. Like he mentions at the very beginning, the story about the waiter that basically blew his mind because he asked for a Diet Pepsi, I believe, and they only served Coke, or the other way around. I mix up the brands, but the waiter then talked to his manager, who went to the store around the corner to get the person what they really wanted. Then the waiter brought it to John Miller, I guess, when he was at the restaurant, and he just was blown away by that little thing. And then he kind of deconstructs that about what enabled this waiter to go above and beyond. It was the fact that the manager gave them the ability to make those types of calls, and it really comes down to really the whole idea behind this book is taking responsibility and impacting the things that you can impact and not projecting the blame onto other people. So I really like that whole message. It's kind of been something that has been indoctrinated in me from a very young age.
Right.
So I read the topic resonated with me right away, but then the way that he explains it, like this book, I really enjoyed it.
This is one that I'm with you in that I think I was just raised in a way that this is almost second nature. Like the concept of personal accountability, and if something goes wrong, I need to do something to fix it. Whether it's my fault or not, I can still take responsibility for it. So that's something that I know me personally, I always jump to. I always assume, like, even if some, like, take for example, somebody rear ends me while I'm driving. Well, it's not necessarily my fault, but I can take responsibility to make sure that everything is fixed. Like, I can make sure that my car is taken care of and not rely on the insurance agency or any of that. I can be the one that takes care of it. And it seems like, and this is something I'm hesitant to talk about, but I understand that it's a big deal right now because this whole personal accountability piece is something that seems to be disappearing in our culture, which
Mm,
is kind of saddening because so many times I run into people who it's the end of the world because somebody else did something to them, or the latest political world, the new president doesn't believe what I believe and is against me, so everything's going to come crashing down. Well, that's not true. It's not necessarily the end of the world because someone else did something to you. It's more about what am I going to do about it? And that's what this is a lot about of, let's come up with the question behind the question. And if I define that, because it's a bit nebulous to say it that way. That was one thing I struggled with here is he would talk about QBQs, and it would be kind of difficult for me at times to just do the translation, but I think that was just because of my own mentality. That's not his fault at all. But the way that he defined a QBQ is a tool that enables individuals to practice personal accountability by making better choices in the moment. And the way that he goes about uh, defining what that actually is, as far as a question goes, is he puts together a series of 3 criteria that you essentially ask yourself. So think of the question behind the question as something that you're going to ask yourself in a moment so that you can create a better outcome, as opposed to falling into this assuming it's of somebody else's fault. You can take that responsibility. But the 3 criteria for one of these questions is that it starts with a what or a how, it contains an I, and it focuses on action. So the classic example here is, what can I do? Something goes wrong, what can I do about it in order to create a better outcome? So to me, that's a great way of leading us. If you look at the cultural thing, if people stopped asking why won't shipping get their act together? Well, instead of asking why won't shipping get their act together, what can I do to better enable shipping to do their job? A completely different question, but it leads to an action, and it's something that you can physically do. I'm rambling now, Mike. You jump in.
no, I completely agree. And this was something that I kind of learned with working with the Asian efficiency team. I think I may have mentioned this story before, where when we were launching the podcast, there was something that had gone wrong. Somebody basically had pushed publish too early
Mm,
on a podcast episode, and it went out to the feeds, and people were downloading it, and the episode wasn't finished. And so at the time, because I was working on the podcast project, I saw that, and immediately I was like, oh no, I need to fix this. And the way that I had always traditionally done things is figure out what went wrong. But the way that I was asking the questions was framed as, who did this? What happened, and who's responsible for this? And when that was happening, when I was going through that process and I was trying to figure that out, Tan basically just corrected me on the spot. He's like, no, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Let's just figure out what we need to do to fix this going forward. And really what he was saying was the application of the question behind the question and implementing the formula that you just mentioned. Begin with the what or the how, it contains the word I, and then focus on the action. So it doesn't matter what somebody else did in the past, but what can I do right at this moment to fix this? And then obviously from a system standpoint, you want to understand what had happened so that you can change the system and make sure that there's safeguards in place so that that doesn't happen again. But I had always focused on figuring things out from the perspective of assigning accountability in terms of blame, as who is the one who did this thing so that we can hold them accountable for whether this worked or didn't work. And that's kind of not the right approach. And one of the things I really like about the Asian Efficiency team is that one of the core values we have is we before me. So a lot of people will say we win or we lose as a team, but at Asian Efficiency, it really is true. Like if we fail in one particular area, we're not going to isolate the single person and shame them for making the wrong decision. We're going to, as a team, figure out how to fix this, how to pull everybody up, how to make the best of this situation, and how to move forward. So I guess the short way of saying this would be that in the past, I had been asking what John Miller would call the IQs, the incorrect questions, in terms of just projecting the blame. But those are incorrect questions because those questions don't produce anything productive or positive from asking them. You can get the same, you can try to figure out the same result, but the way that you ask the question can either be framed as positive or negative. And I realize now that in the past, what I had done a lot of times when I was asking those questions is I was asking them in a negative light. And so that was a big thing for me, was recognizing that you want to ask these questions, yes, but you want to do it in a way that moves the team, the organization, yourself forward.
I think we have a tendency to protect ourselves. Like we have a desire to make sure that if something bad happens, we know that it wasn't something that we did. Like, there's something in us that wants to know it's not my fault. Like I did my job. I did everything correctly. Like there's something in us that wants to say that, and it leads us to, how do I get to that point? How do I prove that it's not me, that it's not my fault? Which leads us to like these incorrect questions, these IQs of, why do they continue to do this? Why do they always make it harder on us? Why did they put in a roundabout? That's a terrible idea in that spot. They should have been in a stoplight. Like there's so many of these things that, like, why would they inflict this on us and putting us in a situation where and it looks like you have this on the outline, we're the victim. Like we're the
Mm-hmm.
one who's had something happen to us. And instead of coming at it from the standpoint of what do I do about it, or how do I solve this right now, instead of coming at it that way, we try to protect ourselves, and we want to make sure that we're in the right, and making sure that we're the ones who we're the ones who are awesome right now, and they're the ones that screwed everything up. Like that's just kind of the mentality we seem to take with a lot of situations, especially negative ones. If it's positive, we want to take credit for it. But if it's something negative, we always want to pass the blame off because we don't want to be the one at fault. We're always the victim in that situation. This is why this is kind of, it'll mess with you a little bit, because if you're always coming at it from the standpoint that this is something that happened to me, and you reverse that and start thinking about, well, even if it's something that negative happened to me, I can still do something about it. If you change that, that's where so many of these protests and the riots and all these social justice groups can start to get somewhere. I just hear a lot of noise with a lot of it, and this is probably highly controversial. Whoops. But I hear a lot of noise with it, and my question is always, well, what are you going to do about it? Like, violence is never the answer. Getting upset and making other people angry, that's never the answer. So what's the action item here? Go back to GTD. What's the next action? What are you going to do about it? And don't say that you need to do this. What is it that I can do in this situation? He told a story about a CEO who went through some of these trainings that they do about QBQs. And the whole point of it was to help people understand personal accountability. And one of the comments that the CEO made toward the end of it is, what can you do about the situation? And it completely missed the point of the whole conference, because you can understand what he's saying is, you need to take personal responsibility. But the better example there would have been if the CEO stood up and said, this is what I need to do. Like, here's what I can do to help whatever situation. So it's kind of a shift in thinking away from, I'm the one who's just at fault, or I'm the one, not that I'm at fault, but I'm the one that's the victim here. and getting away from that and stepping into, well, what do I do about it?
Yeah, and I think that that is a great example because from a CEO perspective, he's looking at that and saying, if I really want to change the culture of this organization, then not saying this is the correct approach, but I'm projecting now his approach is probably, I just need to communicate this to everybody in the organization. So that's why he framed it that way. Personal
Right.
responsibility begins with you. Going back to social justice issues and things like that, there are a lot of times when you can look at it as, I'm just one person, what sort of difference can I make? And really the point that I got from this book is that if you really want to make a big difference, that's the best thing you can do, is to just model it, to do it yourself. And you may not think that you have this big platform and it's not going to ripple down like a CEO would, just telling everybody and assuming that they're going to apply this immediately and there's going to be this big change in the organization. But the truth of the matter is that that approach isn't going to work anyways.
Right.
You're
Right.
going to get much more traction. You're going to get much further if you just apply this to yourself. And so the whole idea of the victim thinking, something that my dad taught me, he said this over and over and over again. He had this graphic made where it was procrastination, and there was an arrow. So like procrastination leads to blame, leads to victim thinking. And the whole idea is that you procrastinate on things that you know you need to do, and then when push comes to shove and things don't go exactly the way that you want them to, that's when things go wrong. And then when people ask you or hold you accountable for the results, then you play the victim card. So classic example of this, and I think we've even mentioned this on this podcast, is you go to your class on the first day of the semester and they give you the syllabus and they say there's going to be a big project due at the end of the semester. Here's the due date. And most people are going to procrastinate on that project. They're going to wait till the week before. And then they're going to pull 4 all-nighters and they're going to try to cram and get this thing done. And then the day before it's due, they have some technical issue, their computer malfunctions, they lose all their work, and it's not my fault. Well, it is your fault. The only reason that you're in that situation is because you put it off so long to begin with. It's the classic dog ate my homework sort of a thing.
Right.
And we can fill in the blanks with our own situation. I mean, every single person does this, where you project that things are going to go perfectly, and then things don't always go perfectly. And then because they don't go the way that you had planned them, instead of assuming the responsibility for the way that things have turned out and not starting on this thing earlier when you had the time and you decided to watch Game of Thrones or whatever the new TV show is, insert your favorite time waster there.
Right.
Then when we actually do have to have the thing done, it's not our fault. Or even sometimes if we get it done, it's just way harder than it needs to be. That's the kind of person I am, is I'll get things done, but if I procrastinate on them, I will project the blame onto other people still when it doesn't go my way, and I'll say, oh, this is so much harder than it needed to be. Well, it's so much harder than it needed to be because I put it off. If I would have just started right away, if I would have pedaled before I got to the hill, I would have had some momentum. This would have been a lot simpler.
So many of our incorrect questions come from that, like the process of, I didn't get this done in time, or I didn't think about it ahead of time, but now that I missed because I waited, well, why would they ever do this to me? Why can't they get their act together? Why am I sitting here waiting to get, why can't they get their discount card to work? Like, I need this right now. Well, you should have been in a week ago. You could have had it figured out a week ago. Like, it happens so much. And even in situations where, you have people who are administrators or secretaries and such. And I run into this all the time with clients, that I need a certain amount of information from them so that I can build a website for them. I give them their deadline because based on the time that they want to launch, here's the date that I need to have all the information from them, which gives me the time to build it. Rarely do they get it to me on time. Just the way it goes. Just the way it happens. And then my typical MO on that is, okay, you were 4 days late on getting me information. The very first thing I do is push the launch date back 4 days. Like, I just take the amount of time and just tack it onto the end, and I always have to have a conversation on why I did that. Like, they don't understand, "Well, that's the date you gave me. Like, that's the date that it should be. Why can't you do what you told me you were gonna do?" It's like, "Well, because you didn't do what you told me you were gonna do." Like, it's just simple cause and effect here, but that whole consequences conversation of taking ownership for the thing that you did or didn't do, in this case, procrastination, leads to a failure of hitting that deadline, which they're not happy with. They don't want to take the blame in this case. They don't want to take credit for screwing up the deadline. Well, it's not that complicated. Just think about it ahead of time. And I understand we're all busy. We have a ton of things going on, but if you're going to commit to something, do it and take ownership of it. Don't try to blame somebody else, which is what so much of this book is about. Of don't put it on somebody else, take it on to yourself. Just own it. It sounds simple. I get that. I'm making this sound crazy easy, but it's not. I understand that, but at the same time, it is that easy. Like just do what you say you're going to do, and very few things are problematic because of that. Maybe I
And
was
when
just
you
raised traditional. I don't know.
and if you don't do what you say you're going to do, and if there is a crisis, then that kind of leads into the next point on the outline, the brainstorming versus blamestorming. I mean, the meeting that you're describing where they're trying to figure out why you pushed the due date back 4 days is an example of blame storming. And they're trying to figure out, well, why is this way? Instead of brainstorming, as I view that as figuring out together the best way to solve this particular problem. And just the whole model of this is going to be delivered by a certain date is going to create some of that. He has a quote in the book where he says, questions that begin with when always lead to procrastination. So when you
Great,
put
great.
when you put it out there that way as like, when are you going to have this done? Then, and I say I'm going to have it done by a specific date, then there's built-in motivation, I guess, to procrastinate. Is the best way to say that. And really, when we ask incorrect questions, when we use when we blame storm, when we do things like that, what we do is we accept stress. It's a choice. He says it's a choice that you make by asking those incorrect questions. And on page 35, he mentions that the answers are in the questions. So literally, it sounds super simple, but it really is true. If you want to get better results, all you really have to do is ask some better questions and not fall into that blame storming cycle. Because those meetings where you're trying to figure out, well, whose fault is this really? You could go back and forth for hours. Well, I couldn't get it to you until 4 days later because of this. And then, there's always going to be a justification. And that's where the procrastination leads to blame, leads to victim thinking cycle comes in. Like there's always going to be something that you can use as a crutch to say, this is not my fault. And that's what, we mentioned a lot about society. And I prefer to just apply this to myself, but this is prevalent in society today, is that we tend to blame other people for the things that happen to us. And really, that's not going to change anything. What we need to do is to not assign the blame. Maybe we did start off disadvantaged. Maybe we are in a tough spot, but blaming somebody else for being there really doesn't help anything. It just makes you bitter. And so what can you do right now to fix that? You can start asking the right questions, following that QBQ formula. What can I do?
I want to go back to this example of, me in this meeting with the client, because something I've been doing for a while that it's mostly me trying to avoid a conflict. I'm trying to be the good freelancer here and trying to make sure it's a positive meeting because it typically leads to better things for me in the long run. It's pretty obvious stuff, I think. Whenever we get into a situation where something negative has happened and they're trying to do this blame storm process of why did this go bad and why is it this way, I find myself typically just trying to say, you know what, let's not go there. You guys can work on that on your end at some point. You can figure out where it went wrong on your end, unless it's something I did, in which case I'm usually the one who's going to say, hey, I screwed this up. Like I try to make sure that I point those things out if I did screw something up and that I know it. But if they go through this process of trying to figure out where something went wrong, my tendency is to say, take your own time and do that. Right now, this is what we need to figure out on how to get forward. And if they still want to hit a certain deadline, even though they were 4 days late, typically what I can do is say, here are a few areas that I'm going to need responses from you, and here is the time frame that has, like, I've given you a week to give me those responses. If you want to gain those 4 days, you need to beat those deadlines. Like, you can make this back up on your end. So if you can make up 4 days in these 3 check-in periods, then we can make those 4 days and still hit your deadline. Now, granted, 99% of the time, they still go until the last day or a day after on those check-in periods, and they don't actually make up time. But in their mind, they're still trying to hit some of those, and they like, oh yeah, we could do that. And then they plan on still hitting that deadline, but then they don't actually make up the time. And then we have another conversation when we're at the deadline and it's not done. Like, okay, guys, it's not complicated. You didn't actually do what you said you were going to do. So it's interesting to me that whenever those blame storms start to crop up, that if you can shut them down and let them solve it on their own end, you can at least start to try to have this conversation of where the ownership lies on moving forward instead of focusing on the past. Now, I'm not trying to discount that there's no value in doing that, because something I try to do, at least personally, is that, if something goes wrong, I want to get the path forward figured out and then come back to it afterwards and figure out what went wrong and why it didn't happen the way I wanted it to. I'm not always the best at that, but I try to, just because I want to know how can I prevent that from happening again in the future. I don't want it to continue to be a problem, but it at least forces that conversation. Is this something you ever do? Do you ever have to deal with folks that want to push deadlines around and blame in different areas, or is this just something that I'm dealing with?
No, it's definitely something that I think probably everybody deals with, because you can't control what other people are going to do, but you can control whether you fall into the blame storming cycle or the brainstorming cycle. And so one of the things he says is like, break the circle of blame. That's really where the focus needs to be. That was one of my big takeaways from this book. I mean, really, there's a single takeaway for me here, but it's that the only person I can change is myself. So I can't try to fix anyone else. I can go back and I can deconstruct the situation. I can figure out where things went wrong, and I can institute procedural changes, systemic fixes to these processes that can make better outcomes in the future. But I can't say, well, client X, you have to do things this way. I think another area that this really manifests is in the tools that you have. He talked about that quite a bit, and I forgot to put this in the outline here, but he mentioned that focusing on what we don't have is a waste of our time and energy. And a lot of times, I know I've fallen into this trap. I think, well, as soon as I get that new MacBook Pro, which actually I am recording this podcast on right now.
What?
Yep. I got a new 15-inch MacBook Pro. Do a lot of video work, and I had a 13-inch with no video card, so it was time.
So jealous.
It's a pretty great machine. But that aside,
I don't doubt that a bit.
that aside, there are definitely cases where I've thought to myself, well, if I could just get this particular tool, it would make everything else so much easier. Now, this is a little bit different because this is a work computer, and it's not something that I personally paid everything for myself. Asian Efficiency helped me out a little bit because I am doing this to create videos for Asian Efficiency. So a little bit different situation. It wasn't just me saying, oh man, I want a new computer. I went from exporting a 5-minute screen flow in 35 minutes to exporting a 45-minute screen flow in 5 minutes. So it makes total sense for this particular situation. But I mean, fill in the blanks. It could be you want to start a podcast, and I can't start a podcast because I don't have my Heil PR40. I don't have an awesome audio interface. I don't have Logic Pro that I can edit this stuff on. Doesn't matter. Use what you've got, or start with some entry-level stuff. I started with a Blue Yeti and GarageBand, and that was completely fine for a really long time. And once you get into something, then you can upgrade your tools a little bit later. But we tend to focus on the tools so much, and we use that as an enabler for our procrastination. He has a quote in there by, I believe it was Deb Weber from State Farm Insurance. Said, every time I do the job with the tools I have, I tend to receive more tools. And I think that's the perfect way to approach this. So the podcast example, just start podcasting. And then once you start getting some momentum, then you can upgrade it. But don't use the tools as a reason not to get started with something. In
So
essence, don't blame your tools or lack thereof.
right, right. Well, you're familiar. You're probably familiar with the podcast Lore by Aaron Mahnke.
Mm-hmm.
He put a tweet out 2 or 3 days ago as we're recording this. I'll see if I can find it or not. But he posted that he's still using GarageBand for Lore, which receives millions of downloads. Like, really? It hit the top podcasts in 2016 for Apple. Like,
Right.
and he's still using GarageBand for his editing. Now, it's an older version because I think he wanted some features that they've pulled since then, but he's still using a free software that came with his Mac. Like, that's just, to me, I'm like, see, you don't have to have super sophisticated tools. Like, I'm complaining about Adobe Audition earlier. Like, that's just something I use. I like using it. Works well. I know how it works. I'm going to run with that. I do all of my recording on a Rode Podcaster. Like, that seems to work really well for me. But it's a tool that I have, and, I could upgrade. There's some ways I could make this better. But for now, it does the job, does a good job, and I'm happy with it. So, at some point, if I get good at podcasting, I'll probably upgrade. If it continues to be something that I want to do, I'll get to that point. But like you said, if I get good and do a good job with the tools I have, more tools will come. That's the way it works.
Right. You just have to take ownership of what you can control, which from a podcast perspective, since this is a podcast, we're talking about podcasting, would be the creation of the actual content. He defines ownership in the book as a commitment of the head, heart, and hands to fix the problems and never again affix the blame. And that kind of ties back to the next point on the outline here, the 3 people that you have to beat. I really like this. I'm into sports, so this sports analogy that he had was really resonated with me. If you played sports competitively, like in high school, for example, you can probably think back to a specific game that was, quote unquote, decided by a bad call or decided by the referee. Because the referees are human, they're going to make mistakes. Maybe it actually is a hometown referee, but that doesn't really matter. And what John Miller says in the book is that you have to be good enough to beat first yourself, second your opponent, and third the referee. And when you think about it that way, it's like, yeah, that makes total sense. And in the case of professional sports, for example, and you're on the biggest stage, you're playing for the Super Bowl. I mean, people work their entire lives to get to that point. It would really stink to have the referee have a bad call that it looks like it determines the outcome of the game. But in real life, for me and for everybody else who is not a professional athlete, you can definitely apply this to your specific situation, and you can say, yeah, there's going to be things that I can do to overcome any variables that the referee in my life, whatever that looks like, would throw my way. So that could be, the referee could be a boss that doesn't understand the huge time commitment that email really is. We've talked about email quite a bit on this podcast. I worked on a product for agent efficiency called Escape Your Email. Some of the research shows that the average U.S. worker spends 6.3 hours per day dealing with email. Okay, well, if you have a boss who sends you an email and then comes into your office 10 minutes later to ask you if you received the email, that's going to waste a lot of time. But there's still things that you can do to set yourself up for success. You can overcome the referee in that particular situation. So recognizing that you are in complete control of the entire outcome, that is really freeing, in my opinion. It's enabling. It gives you permission to be successful in that sense, because you can take responsibility for the entire process, and then you can say, okay, whether I succeed or fail, this is completely on my shoulders, which really it is, because there are things that you can do. Like I mentioned before, you can pedal before the hill. You can gain enough momentum where even a bad call isn't going to matter because you've run up the score.
This is similar to the thing I keep saying. Like, it's not necessarily my fault, but it can be my responsibility. Like, I don't have to rely on the referee in this case to be the one that dictates the outcome for myself. Like, I can take ownership of that. it's kind of disheartening to see how many people reject this concept. And that warrants why this book exists, because personal accountability is not something that is, I don't want to say that it's not common, but it's not mainstream, I guess is the word for it. Because it's not something you just see in absolutely everybody. And I could pinpoint certain groups, but you're always going to be stereotyping, and there's not always true stereotypes. So it can fall in a lot of different categories, but ultimately, if I can beat my opponent, I can beat myself. But when it comes to the other people who are setting the rules and the ones that are making the calls that dictate the outcome in front of me, it's really up to me to make sure that I'm good enough to even beat them. And I think about my high school days and some of the things that I did, especially in basketball, because I was speaking captain, is what they called it, for our basketball team my senior year. And that was something that I learned with the refs there. Like, okay, there was a bad call made. My first instinct was to go ask him what happened and what was it that he did. Like, just can you explain to me what happened so that we can make sure it doesn't happen again? And oddly enough, if I ask that question in like the first quarter of a basketball game, the refs typically wanted to try to help us get better, which probably swayed them a little bit in the wrong direction. Like they were favoring us in some cases, and I'm not so sure I was comfortable with that. But it happened. Like if you're willing to say, where did I go wrong, or how do I fix it in the future, then people are a lot more forgiving, and they're more inclined to try to help if you're willing to ask for help. And that's something that I think is very unique in some circles, where we tend to have this victim thinking. We tend to expect or feel entitled to certain things. And that's not necessarily a good thing in most cases. You're better off trying to come at it from the standpoint of, the main question here: what can I do? What can I do about this? What's the QBQ here? How do I come at this in a better way? And, one of the quotes I noticed that you wrote down here is, the easiest thing to spot is gaps in integrity in others. So
Hmm.
if I'm looking for something that I can do about it, it's easier for me to step away from this blaming mentality that's looking for something that they did wrong. It's taking it on to myself instead of looking for gaps in what they're doing.
Yeah, and I think I've shared this on the podcast before too. But one of my favorite quotes is that we tend to judge other people by their actions and ourselves by our intentions.
True.
So
Very true.
we see what other people do and we assume that they meant to hurt us, and we project that onto them, and that just leads us down the cycle of playing the victim card. He talks in the book about how personal accountability changes the world one choice at a time. And it's literally every single situation, every single social interaction that you have, assuming that the other person, assuming the best about the other person, I guess is maybe the best way to do it. Because, yeah, the easiest thing to spot is those gaps in integrity in other people. It's easy to spot the mistakes that other people make. But that really doesn't help fix anything, because he mentions on page 68 that change only comes from the inside as a result of decisions made by the individual. So if you want to change your situation, you have to start within yourself. So going back to the quote, personal accountability changes the world one choice at a time. Personal accountability literally will change your world one choice at a time, assuming that you implement this. And this is the thing. It's so easy to do. It doesn't require anybody else being on board with this, agreeing with it, doesn't require buy-in from your spouse, your family. You can do this right now. It's just sometimes difficult, and we don't want to accept the responsibility. We don't want to say that, yeah, the buck stops here, that I am in control of my own outcomes, because sometimes we don't like those outcomes.
He's got a section here because he kind of talks about how these QBQs, they're great questions, but they're intended to be asked of ourselves. We've talked about this quite a bit at this point. Like, it's not necessarily, I can't expect someone else to change things, and I don't need to be the victim here, but it can be a bit tempting to say, here are the questions that I'm asking myself. You should ask yourself these as well. It would be very
Right.
easy to say, here's a great way for you to start thinking. You should start thinking this way. And he points out very clearly, no, that's not the point here. You should be asking yourself and not other people. The quote that he's got around this, it's not about asking better questions of our coworkers, customers, or family. It's about asking better questions of ourselves. So
Hmm.
don't try to project these on to other people, which is something I wish I could do and I would love to do, and I would love to hand this book out to a lot of people, but it's going to rub people the wrong way and it's going to have the
Right.
opposite effect.
Yeah. One of the things that I liked in here is the QBQ Serenity Prayer. So the Serenity Prayer is pretty popular, and my grandma had this hanging in her house.
Yep.
And I've seen it a lot of different places. The Serenity Prayer goes, God grant me the grace to accept the things I cannot change, the wisdom, the, I forget how it goes. Basically, accept the things you can't change, the courage to change the things that you can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And he kind of reframes this in terms of the message of the book. And I thought this was so good. He says, God grant me the serenity to accept the people I cannot change, the courage to change the one I can, and the wisdom to know it's me.
What was the story? There was some gal that had someone who worked for her, and they eventually parted ways because they couldn't work together. And it was a couple years later, and as things worked out, he ended up working for her again. And the second time around, her comment was that this is awesome. Like, we're working really well together. I wonder what all he changed. And she realized, no, he didn't change at all. He's still the same. The difference is how I'm treating him and how I see what he's doing. And
Yep.
it was purely a difference in herself and not this uh, this person working for her. So I think it's very interesting if you come at it from this is all me, and it's all about how I perceive things and what I do about it. I've got a couple quotes here. One kind of refers back to the tools thing we were talking about. When will we get better tools and better systems? And the quote that he had here was about, or it is, here you go, page 40, succeeding within the box. And this is specifically geared towards creativity. And, we do a lot of creative work, Mike, you and I. And so much of that revolves around coming up with something new or finding a way to portray an idea or display it or choosing the medium in order to convey a concept. And so many times we want to have a better tool. I would like a better MacBook. I'm going to come steal Mike's MacBook. So there's so many of these cases where, I wish I had a better tool, but frankly, creativity, it really thrives when certain constraints are put on it or when there's a certain box that you're trying to work within. That's so much of why I love coding and development, because there are certain constraints that you need to work within. And once you're within that, the sky's the limit on how you actually achieve it in most cases. Like, there's a problem to be solved and you've got certain ceilings that you need to work underneath of in order to accomplish something. So I love that concept of succeeding within the box and not always trying to make sure that you get outside the box or think outside the box, but being willing to work within it. You get the difference there? Is that
Yep.
too nebulous?
No, definitely. And I mentioned, at the beginning of the new MacBook as an example. That's again an example of evolving the tools that I was using. I mean, I was succeeding within the box. I was doing video on a 13-inch MacBook Pro with no video card. And I got to the point, because I had done that, because I had focused on the tools that I had and just using them to create the content, that I got to the point where I was like, okay, I can justify now upgrading the tools. But the important thing is to start where you are with what you have.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. Start somewhere and start now with what you currently have. So the other quote that I mentioned I had two. Page 116, he mentions wisdom is what we learn after we know it all. And I was reading this in a situation where my mother-in-law was in the living room and my wife was on the couch. We were all kind of just doing our own thing. So I, of course, had a book, and I ran across this and I read it out loud. And my wife and my mother-in-law both almost simultaneously, man, that's true. Like, yes, once we think we know it all, eventually we learn that no, we don't know it all. And the more I learn and the more I feel like I understand, the less I know. It's just kind of crazy how that happens. The more I understand, the more I know, the less I know. But it just seems like the more areas and the more knowledge that I gain, or the more areas that I feel like I'm starting to understand, the more I realize there are even more areas that I don't understand. So I really liked that quote of wisdom, what we learn after we know it all.
There was one quote I did not like in this book.
That's good. We haven't had many of those.
He said that we buy too many books.
Oh, yes. I hated that. Absolutely hated that.
I disagree. I put, we buy too many books. Blasphemy. And I
What
get his
was the,
point. His point is that we buy the books and they sit on the shelf and we don't actually read them and we don't apply anything that we learn in them, which is really the point of this podcast. So hopefully we don't fall into that definition. But yeah, I will definitely continue to buy books.
yes,
Sorry, John.
I know. And it was a whole chapter that he dedicated to we buy too many books. But in this particular case, his chapters were really short. So that entire quote unquote chapter was a whopping 3 paragraphs long. So I attributed the shortness of that particular chapter within this book to its weight in value. It's like, okay, it's really short, doesn't have a lot of value, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to jump into action items here?
Yeah. Like I mentioned earlier, I really only have the one action item, which is no trying to fix anyone else.
Nice. So don't
And
fix me.
and again, I don't know exactly how you I don't know how you quantify that, but really the whole message of the book, I don't know how you quantify any of the stuff that he's talking about necessarily, which is really why I think he ends the book by saying, great, so now that you finished the book, read it again, because he really wants to make sure that you get it, and that this permeates down and it actually affects and changes the way that you live your life. So you can ask me if I'm doing okay on this, but I don't have like a definition of done for this particular action item.
We run across those on occasion. Like I've got a couple here that it's like I don't know how to measure this. Sometimes I wish these action items you could measure, but at the same time, there would be so many things we're measuring, we wouldn't get anything done. So
Exactly.
just the way it works. So I have one that's a little similar to that, is noticing my blaming tendencies. So essentially noticing when I ask these incorrect questions of why can't they get this right? Instead of asking those and noticing when I'm trying to put it off on someone else and make myself the victim, instead of that, just pay attention to it and don't allow it to happen. Uh, and I'm afraid to spend much time with that one because I'm afraid of how often I do it. So, okay. The other one that I wrote down here is thinking out loud around others at work and my kids. And I mean that in a very pointed way in what can I do about this right now? So, primarily, what I'm trying to do is create a situation where I can help other people see how I'm thinking about something, such that if something goes wrong, what can I do about this right now? Like, what's the next step here? And saying that out loud, obviously talking to myself so I can play off the I'm crazy card. But, what can I do about this right now? Primarily in my work situations and around my kids, because at work, if I'm saying those things out loud, it's potentially something that other people can notice. Okay, it's not important to focus on whose fault this is. It's not important to find the blame, but how can I fix this right now? Like, what is it I can do? And trying to, I guess, push that a little bit just inadvertently and through osmosis, do the whole lead by example thing at work. And that can translate into my kids as well. I would love for my girls to grow up not saying that it's someone else's fault. Even if it is someone else's fault, I would like for them to be really good at this and being really good at personal accountability and being willing to take responsibility for things. Even if it's not them that caused it, I would love for them to have that skill and that mindset. So I want to try to talk about those things out loud at home and at work, just so that both situations, the people around me can see that example. And hopefully that'll start to permeate throughout circles. That's my thought. So I'm going to try it,
Nice.
see how it goes. As for how easy this book was to read, I thought it was crazy easy to read. It's very understandable. I thought that Mr. Miller was quite the author. He could distill things quite easily and seemed to be able to convey a lot of information in a very short book. Well, I guess I wouldn't say it's a super short book, but it's shorter than some that we have on the list. But I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good book. I would recommend it.
Yeah, there are, I'm just looking real quickly. There are 39 chapters, but there are 115 pages, and a lot of the chapters are not even an entire page.
Right.
One chapter, chapter 36, I'm looking at right now, is literally 2 sentences. So you could probably read this entire book in less time than you would listen to this podcast.
Yep.
But it is definitely an easy read, and the content in there is really good. It's very approachable. I really enjoyed this book. I do got to knock him for saying we have too many books, though.
Yes.
So I got to give him 4.5.
Just because of
The
that.
star rating. Yep. Sorry, John.
Just because he told
Great
us
book,
we had too many books.
but you're not getting my books. Sorry.
Well, he even called out listening to too many podcasts in that chapter too.
Right.
So I was like, oh, okay, this is a chapter I'm gonna skip. So yeah, I would echo the 4.5. Just minor details that lead me to that aren't really worth going into. But yeah, I would put it at 4.5. It's a really good book. There's a lot in here. There are a number of groups that I wish would read this, but that's just life, the way it goes. Don't try to fix them, fix me.
Right. And that's a really stupid, spiteful, maybe, rating. I'll expound on that a little bit more, I guess. The book is really, really good, but I would prefer, I guess, to only give the 5 stars to the books that completely just blow me out of the water. There have been a couple of books that have done that. This book, while it was really, really good, I'm really glad that I read it, didn't have that sort of effect for me. And again, maybe it was my upbringing where my dad has kind of preached this stuff to me from a very young age. So I didn't really feel like there was really anything completely new in here for me, but the way that he said it was kind of refreshing. It was presenting the information in a different way. So there was definitely a lot of takeaways for me, but I do want to qualify that statement. I'm not just stocking it because he said,
Right.
don't buy any more books.
It's mostly just in jest. But yeah, I'm with you because, we're making this sound like a 4.5 is a bad thing. And it's not. It's a 4.5 out of 5. Like you're most of the way there. So it's not like it's it's not like that's a bad rating.
Right.
It's just that, those 5-star books, we shouldn't have one every single week. Like those are special. Those are special books.
Hopefully. So the upcoming books, next one that we're going to be reading is Decisive by Chip and Dan Heath, which is one that I picked out. And then you picked out one that I honestly have never heard of.
The Shallows by Nicholas Carr. This is an internet book in that it's about the internet and what it does to our brain. So we did some of this with Brain Chains. I think this one is a little easier to read and maybe a little better written. And just skimming through it, I think it has I shouldn't say a little. It has some more depth to it and a broader range. That's probably the better way to say it. That's my first impression on a book that I have skimmed over and have read literally none other than skimming. There you go.
Nice. All right. So if you want to follow along, you can go to bookworm.fm/list. You can get a list of all the books that we have read, as well as the upcoming books. And there's also a button on the webpage and on the sidebar to recommend a book. So if you wanted to make a recommendation for one you'd love us to cover here on Bookworm, we would really appreciate that. We've got a handful of recommended books, and some of them have been making their way into the rotation, like the Checklist Manifesto, which was the last one that we did. So absolutely, we want to hear from you. If you have any recommendations, please submit that via the website.
And if you listen to one of our podcasts or you've read one of the books and you think we completely misrepresented it, or you're mad at something we said, or you're like, yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. If that's you, The best way to let us know about that is on iTunes. So you can drop, or I'll drop a link to our podcast that's on iTunes in the show notes, and you can just click on that and go let us know what you think of the show over there. That's a great way to help other people find the show as well.
Hopefully, you're getting a lot out of these episodes, and we really appreciate you tuning in. So we will catch you next time.